Two powerful coalitions have been at war throughout the galaxy for what seemed like an eternity. Powerful and old, they were engaged in a battle that stretched across the stars. Systems that the Norani Dominion and the Terok Alliance had tossed aside. They put all they had into the battle, including entire species bred for war, vast ships, and advanced weapons. Despite being aware of the turmoil, they had stayed out of the spotlight, concentrating on developing their nascent space colonies and defending their own. But, as the conflict continued, neutrality had its limits. Desperate for new supplies, the Terok Alliance's forces looked to Earth, believing that humanity was a minor race that lagged behind in technology and was comparatively unimportant in the overall context of galactic affairs. However, the humans had something that the Alliance needed, and their numbers had increased. After innumerable wars, their armies were exhausted, and they viewed humans as a practical way to replenish their manpower. Thus, the Terok issued their ultimatum rather than an invitation, terms for Earth's leaders to either join the fight or suffer annihilation. Despite humanity's best efforts to stay out of the cosmic war, the decision was no longer theirs. They had to decide whether to risk complete destruction or commit their people to fight in a war that wasn't theirs. The Terok took the grim but unavoidable choice that humanity would go to war. Since humans were an undeveloped species, it was obvious from the start that they didn't have high expectations for their technology, rudimentary by galactic standards. Their only combat experience was in planetary conflicts, which humanity had never engaged in. Considering them expendable, the Terok committed human forces to space war, placing them on the least important battlefields where they might serve, as distractions or cannon fodder, while the actual soldiers, the Alliance's elite extraterrestrial species, managed the crucial missions. Humanity's hesitation to participate was mistaken for weakness. The Terok leadership was unable to understand why people had made such a concerted effort to avoid getting involved in the conflict. They saw war as merely another facet of life in the galaxy, which all species had battled their way into relevance at some point. Now, humanity had to prove itself or perish trying. What the Terok was unaware of was that strife throughout Earth's history, ranging from ancient wars that raged over continents to contemporary conflicts fought with increasingly destructive weaponry, had taught humans the harsh realities of war. Violence was nothing new to humanity, but it was something they had never chosen to engage in. The Galactic War, not because they were weak, but rather because they were more aware of the actual costs of war than other species. They understood that going to war was not something to be taken lightly. The first deployment was tense, dispersed over far-flung outposts, designated to support positions with no opportunity to influence the course of the battle. Terok leaders gave instructions with a sense of superiority, hardly acknowledging them, convinced that these people were merely pawns in a much bigger game. But the humans didn't gripe. Instead, they watched, listened, and readied themselves for what lay ahead. Their military officials knew that survival in battle would not rely on ostentatious technology or physical power, but on adaptability, resilience, and taking advantage of every opportunity, regardless of the odds. The Norani forces, who had been engaged in combat for so long, had become accustomed to their surroundings. Their tactics had become standardized, believing that superior firepower and cutting-edge technology would always prevail. But they had forgotten the chaos that could result from real war, the kind humanity had perfected over hundreds of years. With little fanfare, humanity entered the battle and was confined to the periphery of a disputed system. The objective was simply to offer cover for the Baron, who was tasked with holding a strategically insignificant planet. When the Terok forces attacked a neighboring Norani outpost, humanity's role was to hold their ground for a few hours before falling back. Nobody thought they would last long when the enemy showed up. Humans understood they were up against the odds, but they didn't panic. Instead, they fought with perseverance that surprised the alien commanders. Rather than using static defense or standing in stiff formations, the humans' defenses were so flexible in the face of the crisis that their Tarok overseers were perplexed. The humans used the environment to their advantage, creating traps for the Norani army and planting ambushes throughout the rocky terrain. Despite being greatly outnumbered, they moved as a single cohesive unit, communicating effectively. They didn't fight like any other species in the galaxy. They battled with inventiveness and unpredictability, qualities learned from every struggle and war throughout Earth's history. The Norani forces lacked the knowledge to engage in this type of conflict. They had anticipated a straightforward conflict and an easy triumph over a weaker foe. Instead, they discovered that humans battled as if their survival depended on outwitting and outmaneuvering their enemies. They employed covert techniques and guerrilla tactics, fast thinking acquired through generations of experience in the worst conditions possible. The Tarok headquarters received reports that the human troops were holding their ground longer than intended. They thought the first wave of attacks would cause the humans to collapse. At first, the Tarok leaders rejected the reports of the Norani being forced back, thinking it was exaggeration. They believed humans couldn't be thriving in an environment with more developed organisms. However, it became evident as hours passed that something was happening on that far-off battlefield. By the conclusion of the first day, humanity had done the unimaginable. Not only had they retained their position, but the Norani forces were forced to retreat. While the win wasn't significant in the overall context of the conflict, it was important for humanity, as it marked the first step toward showing the galaxy that they were more than a tiny player thrown into a conflict they didn't want. The Tarok commanders, still haughty, became a little more cautious. They couldn't deny the results, but they still refused to acknowledge them. Humanity's journey had just begun. They were prepared to demonstrate their true abilities to the galaxy. Despite their early victory, the conflict was far from over. The Tarok Alliance's position in the Galactic War remained uncertain. Human forces were pushed to the very periphery of the fight, as the Tarok believed their success was an anomaly, assuming they would only remain in place or act as diversions. But humanity had already experienced the harsh realities of combat, and they weren't about to let their next chance pass by. Their mission took them to a dismal and gloomy planet called Zorth 9. It was the ideal location to send forces considered expendable. In the eyes of the Tarok, neither side considered it a priority, and humanity still fell into that category. They believed the human force would only impede the Norani's progress. The attitude ingrained in Earth's troops wasn't one of survival, but of adaptability and self-reliance. The Norani, a race renowned for their overwhelming numbers and physical prowess, arrived on the battlefield, armed and ready. Their commanders saw the impending engagement as little more than routine. After swiftly crushing the humans, they would turn their attention to more urgent matters. The accounts of humanity's unexpected resistance in prior conflicts were written off as minor, setbacks or oddities in a war that was otherwise expected. But when they arrived on Zorth 9, no simple battle was in store for the Norani. The humans had already strengthened the terrain, transforming the stony wasteland into a labyrinth of death traps. As soon as the Norani soldiers arrived, they were attacked, but not how they had anticipated. Rather than confronting the Norani directly, the humans used the planet itself as a weapon. They lured the enemy into narrow ravines, launching controlled explosions that sent boulders and debris falling. Human warriors in small groups carried out swift, accurate attacks before vanishing into the landscape, abandoning the Norani. Disoriented and disheartened, the Norani were perplexed, not just by the strategies, but by the unwavering determination of the human troops. Most species might have fled in the face of the Norani, but the humans fought with precision, adapting, as though they had anticipated every scenario. They coordinated attacks from multiple sources, moving erratically, much like guerrilla fighters, never staying in one place long enough for the Norani to launch a successful counterattack. The Norani weren't ready for this kind of fight, and soon, realized that brute force wasn't enough to defeat the humans. With their unusual strategies and the use of the landscape to create terror and confusion, the humans were not just killing, they were outwitting the enemy. As the conflict on Zorth 9 carried on, the goal became clear: to break the Norani's will to fight. The Tarok commanders were caught off guard once more. The humans were meant to be holding the line, stalling the Norani. Instead, reports from the battlefield showed that human soldiers were winning. With inventiveness never before seen in the galaxy, the Tarok had always viewed warfare as a competition of strategy and firepower. But the humans were changing the rules with every battle they fought. The Tarok leadership could no longer deny the consequences. With each passing fight, humanity's reputation grew. They were no longer expendable, and they were quickly emerging as the war's most powerful force. Humanity hadn't requested to be involved in this conflict at first, but now that they were determined to emerge stronger. The galaxy was starting to understand the full extent of humanity's resolve.